How does experiencing loss at such a young age, how did that affect you?
There were not many instances where I experienced that something was missing, right? Unless and until it kind of became explicit at some point, right? One, because I was probably the most pampered, not just in the four or five of us in the household, within the household, but across the both paternal side of the family and maternal side of the family. I think, yeah, there have also been a number of instances where um, where I felt like even basic things like a parent teacher meeting at a school, right? For instance, those instances were probably a lot less compared to me not feeling it. And that was because thanks to my family who didn't make me feel that something was missing.
Hey Raghu, how's it going?
Hi, Prateek. Very well, thank you. Nice to see you after a really long time. Um,
Yes.
all well here. Yeah, long days have begun. So just came back from a walk. Yeah, it all well. Looking forward to the spring and summer now.
Awesome, awesome. Just to add some context for people who are listening and watching to this, Raghu and I actually met on a flight about 6 years back. I think, if I can remember correctly, it was March 2018. It was a Lufthansa flight
Very
from
good
Munich to
memory.
Mumbai. Uh, and I was actually flying to see, well, I was flying to surprise my cousin for her wedding. Um, and I remember the story vaguely, but I kind of remember some specifics about it. And if you want to jump in at any point, please feel free to do so. But essentially, how we started talking was um, I was sitting on the aisle next to you, but on the same row. And I was sitting next to an older lady, and I'm not trying to say anything negative about her, but when I walked, and this was close to landing, if I can remember, and this was close to landing time, and for some reason, she chose to put her bag on my seat, and she wasn't moving her bag away from the seat. And I believe the air hostess was like, "Sir, you need to sit down. We're starting to land soon." And that's when I think the seat next to you was empty. So you were like, "Hey, you could come take a seat here." So I was like, "All right, sure." I kind of sat down, and then we started talking a little more. And you actually were very kind. You dropped me off at the hotel that I was staying that night because I had to catch a flight the next morning um, to go to Mangalore from Bombay. And that's sort of how we met. And like then I think on our cab ride, we sort of connected over Facebook, and that's how I reached out to you about a month or so ago, trying to get this going. So that's sort of the short end of the story for those of you listening and watching. Does that bring back any memories for you by any chance? Yes, no, maybe it's completely fine if it doesn't bring anything.
You have a very good memory, I must admit. All I recall is, yeah, definitely meeting you on a flight en route to Mumbai, but nothing beyond that.
That's
So
okay.
you've got great memory, I must admit, for sure.
Thank you.
But definitely recall us having a nice chat, exchanging Facebook contacts. And now that you mention, yeah, I'm recalling that it was a flight from, um, I think I was transiting in Munich as well to Mumbai. I was initially thinking maybe it's London, Mumbai, but now that you mention, I think it's Munich, Mumbai.
Hmm. Yeah. So let's get into this. So if you are open to sharing, what do you do, and what are your interests in personal life? Any likes, any dislikes, aspirations that you have, and so on and so forth. Anything and everything you're comfortable sharing about yourself.
Right. So to everyone watching, I'm Raghu Ramkumar. I'm a Hyderabadi, originally from Hyderabad in India, but I've been living in the UK for about close to 8, 9 years now. So I I studied in Hyderabad, worked there for a little bit, and then after working for about 6 years in India and Kenya, I moved to the UK to do my master's. And since then, I've been living in the UK. And yeah, so that's a bit about my personal move. In terms of what I do as a profession, so I'm a strategy consultant by background. I know it's a very elusive subject, but what I essentially do as part of my day job is to help businesses and organizations grow. I do that by helping them identify the right markets to invest in, right capabilities to develop, um, right, say, right areas to kind of build resilience in order to help future proof the organization or the business. So I work as a corporate strategy professional in an infrastructure and engineering consultancy firm. And yeah, so that's what I do as a profession. I've got about 15 years of work experience doing that very piece initially in a different sector, and then now for the past 10 years in the engineering and infrastructure sector. And so I'm also involved in a lot of, we all hear about sustainable development a lot these days. So, and about 40 to 45% of emissions come from the infrastructure and construction industry. So 10 years ago, I made a conscious move to move into this industry just so that the work I do has a maximum impact for us as an industry and also as a world to kind of, secure the future, secure the planet for the future generations. And so I'll pause there, but that's what I do as a profession. I won't go into specifics, what my role is and all of that, but I hope that gives a general sense of what I do for work.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Um, what was your background in education, in an education sense? Like, what did you study? What did you get your degrees in, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure. I did my bachelor's in computer science, specializing in management and finance. Um, when I say specialization, the electives were focused on management back in 2009-10, and then joined IBM, International Business Machines Corporation. Spent about 6 years there, first part of their software architecture division, and then moved into pre-sales enablement, then did a little bit of solutions enablement and branding, and eventually moving into strategy and transformation, and did a lot of mobile transformation, cloud transformation, cognitive transformation, agile transformation, both for clients and internal enterprise. And then, having spent 6 7 years there, I then started my MBA, Master's in Business Administration, with Lancaster University Management School, specializing in strategy. So graduated there and then started working for Arup, which is an engineering and consultancy firm headquartered in London. Spent about 6 years there, but while I was working there, I started working on a part-time PhD focused on strategy, policy, and governance. So I'm working towards I've probably got 2 more years to complete it, just because I'm doing it part time alongside a full time job. But eventually, when I graduate, I'll have a doctorate in political and social sciences. And the research that I'm looking at explores how cities can become creators of policy for their specific context rather than being mere delivery vehicles of national policy. So, how can cities become more autonomous, and what models of multi level governance are evolving in today's day and age, and how cities around the world are taking on the reins to create policies that are tailored to their communities and needs of their people. So, I started that in 2020, and hoping to finish it by 2026, latest by 2025. And currently, I work for a company called Atkins Realis, which is a Canadian multinational. And again, like as I mentioned, I work as a director for corporate strategy in the firm, but based at London.
Understood. Understood. What got you into computer science as a course of study when you were studying in Hyderabad?
I think it was just at that time the potential it had to land a job. Probably that's one. And then secondly, I was clear on more than being clear on what I wanted to do. I was very clear on what I didn't want to do. So I was allergic to circuits and resistors and capacitors and all of that. So I said anything that covers any of those subjects. Nothing against anyone or any subject, but wasn't for me. So what I didn't want to do, I was very clear. So I ruled out all the other options. And I think, thinking back probably 15 years, not even 15, actually, almost 20 years now, right? I think there were very limited choices as well. And, a typical kind of coming from a typical Indian household, you're focused on landing a job just after work. So the whole idea of choosing something was down to, yeah, will I find a job post graduation? But I think, following that, this whole idea of, you can afford to move because, you don't necessarily have great ideas about, your career when you're actually, even before you get into college, and how, like, we all tend to kind of focus on, okay, I've taken this, I have to be in this for the next how many ever years. I was constantly kind of challenging that. So in my first 2 years at IBM, I was very adamant to try out a number of different things. And thankfully, I got the necessary support as well from two very supportive managers, who pushed me, who encouraged me, who supported me to try out all those aspects. While at the same time, there are people who said you shouldn't be doing all of that. You should just focus on this and then develop your expertise in a specific area. But I tried 4 or 5 things, and then I said, okay, this is not my cup of tea. This is not something I want to be doing in the longer term. And then I landed on something which I then caught on, and which has stayed on for 15 years now.
That's awesome. You mentioned something very interesting that I'd like to explore a little further. The fact that you were challenging, I guess, those goalposts in the sense of not necessarily having to stick to what you did as or pursued as an undergraduate in computer science. I do feel like a lot of us struggle with that in this world, to where we feel like, oh, we've picked it. This is where we have to stay. We cannot move out of this. But I mean, I'm not old enough to speak like a philosopher, but I guess one of the joys of life is sort of finding your curiosities and what interests you, and being able to make those shifts um, when you can, and sort of taking those risks, excuse me, and following what you want to do, right? Because staying in that place that probably isn't fulfilling is not going to keep you happy for that long. Was that sort of like the emotional motivator in some sense for you?
See, there are a number of questions that come out of this, right? One, why don't you want to pursue this, right? And two, is it just because you don't like it, or is it because you want to do something different? Is it because everyone is doing something, or is it because so the number of questions that will come up, but eventually it was down to me kind of really thinking, you know and for some reason, I feel I've always had this, I don't know whether I'll call it a personal advantage, but if I knew that this is not something that'll stick with me for a longer time, then I probably know that immediately, right? And I also had this kind of, you know, what do you call, um, a time when, I used to work on something and come back home thinking, okay, like, how will this pan out in the next 10 years, right? And there are certain causes that I've always been very focused and particular about personally, because of both personal experiences and familial experiences. So I'm, take it education, health, nature, um, are some aspects that are very close to my heart. So I started to kind of think, okay, if I want to be doing something big in any of these areas in 10 years time, in 20 years time, in 30 years time, you know what is it that can get me to that place, and at the same time kind of, you know help with short term needs, like, getting a salary at the end of the every month, which is important, and at the same time, keeping me happy while doing that. So that was an emotional, or not an emotional, more a personal kind of motivator for me to explore a couple of options. And then, obviously, I had mentors in the firm in my first job, who were both kind of supportive, but at the same time, kind of created a safe boundary for me to say, okay, like, we know you've got this idea, we know you've got that idea. Why don't you actually try it out? Right, which is to me very unique 20 years ago in a workspace, right? I've heard of people who have got other experiences, but in my case, my mentors and my well-wishers have created a little safe playground for me. They said, we know you've got the capability, we know you have the ability, so try it out, it's beneficial for the firm. And that attitude was not very common at that time, so I was quite lucky enough to have that support system in place at work. So tried out, something. I tried out something, and then I said, okay, this is definitely not going to work for me. I'm not probably good at marketing. Then so I moved into sales and pre-sales enablement, and then decided that's not for me either. But not that I was doing bad at any of those. You know, you take on a job, it's again like, in the culture to actually, give it your whole and soul. So it was giving it everything, it was, getting credits for everything I was doing, but still I felt, okay, no, this is not something I want to be doing. But when I moved into, I still remember it was probably mid 2012, when this whole cloud analytics, mobile, social, boom was ramping up, and vice president from California reached out saying, "Will you be able to help on this mobile first initiative? Our company is looking to transform, and we're trying to develop a strategy. One, to see what capabilities we can develop through acquisitions, and two, how can we position ourselves as providing mobile services to clients." And that got me excited for some reason, also because how the VP pitched it. So I said, okay, yeah, will definitely bring me on board. Let's see how that works out. And since then, I think there has never been looking back. And what I love about, again, just to cut it short, what I love about what I do right now is, it's an eagle's eye view perspective. So, I get to kind of, take a helicopter view on things, and have a futuristic view on, okay, if I do this, how will this look like in 5 years time, in 10 years time? And I do that for my own personal self, but at the same time doing it at work or for organizations that I work for, feel makes me feel good as well. So I think that answers your question one, in terms of, how did I challenge some of those, traditional, conventional wisdom that existed then, and how I managed to navigate some of that and get to where I am today.
Totally, because the question that I've always thought of a lot is how are we um, I'm trying to see how to frame this the best way possible, but I guess there's this expectation set that maybe it's not communicated this way, but it's definitely like an underlying thought in some sense, in my personal opinion, in that at 18 you should know what you want to do for the rest of your life, which is absolutely impossible if for any 18-year-old, I would say, if you think about it that way. Again, sure, we all there's people like there's a lot of sports persons who probably at the age of 12 knew that's all they wanted to do for the rest of their lives, and they're now succeeding um, in their fields of choice. So absolutely there are those outliers, if you will, but I guess for the general public, I definitely feel like there's that expectation that you need to know what you want to do at that age. Uh, did you ever feel that growing up, or was there a little more flexibility to where not just the environment that you worked in, but the environment you grew up in supported that?
Uh, I think, I mean, we all can agree that at 18, everyone has an expectation that we all are responsible adults, right? Um, so I don't think personally for me there was an expectation that I figure out what I want to do with life at 18, but at least 18 or even many years before that, I realized that what it takes to be a responsible adult, right? So which means you know supporting your family, developing a career that's fulfilling, you know educating yourself. Education, I think, was you know fundamental in the family. The best gift, this used to be a constant thing that used to be said in the family everywhere, right? If there's one thing that you can gift someone, it should be education, because nothing can beat it, right? And if you give someone education, then you're actually you know supporting them in the right way. So that has kind of influenced me to kind of go on to study further, be it my post graduation or the various professional qualifications, or my current um, doctorate program as well. So I think that's been there. So I think, yeah, support your family. You don't have to earn too much, but definitely earn to support yourself, and your dependents, right? And I think serve, help when you can, serve the society in whatever way you can, and be disciplined and well mannered, right? So when you at 18, I think those principles were like very clear in my head, right? And or even before then, as I mentioned. But there was never a, except that I have to develop a fulfilling career, there was never an expectation that I should have sorted everything out at 18. That was not the case. And also, you know, personally, my family had the confidence in me that whatever I did, I did it for a reason. I wouldn't do anything without thinking it twice, thrice, a number of times in my head. Because I remember as a kid, uh, even if a day before the exam, if I was out playing, they knew that I would have probably like finished studying. So there was never a push for me to go and study. In fact, there was always a push for me to like leave your book inside, go and play. Right. So there was a general tendency for me to like take my book and sit down. So I always used to crave to have my book in hand. So I think that way the expectation from the family was not there at all. They were confident that I would probably navigate and figure it out. So I probably would say, yeah, it was pretty straightforward that way. But yeah, there were experiences where I think that maturity developed over time. It didn't happen that I had to like figure it out at 18 and then kind of realize at 25 that didn't happen with me. So probably like figured it out when I was 13, 14, and then, had it all, not sorted, but at least kind of chalked out a roadmap when I was probably 17, 18.
Would you say that it's those experiences and that confidence that was sort of exuded by your parents that helped you understand those responsibilities at that age? Because, and this is very generalistic, I'd say, the way I'm asking this, in the sense that we live in a world where people are always trying to figure out their responsibilities and things and so on. But it's not that often that you hear, oh, okay, like I at least had some things narrowed down at a certain age, and where, especially if you were like 15 to 18, essentially, because a lot of the times you hear the saying that 20s is where you figure yourself out and this and that. And then you have these other schools of thought. They're like, oh no, you're never done figuring yourself out. You're always figuring yourself out, and so on and so forth. So I do understand those schools of thought as well, because I guess as you're exposed to more things in life, I guess your understanding increases and the way you think about things potentially expands as well. But I'm curious to know, from that sense, would those like some of the factors that helped you understand or at least figure out that responsibility at that time?
Yeah, probably yes, and no. So, I grew up with my grandparents alongside, right? Like my mom passed away when I was 5, so I grew up with my living in a house with my dad and both my paternal grandparents, and my grandfather, still recall, had a fractured right leg, right? I think around 91 maybe. He met with an accident, which meant, he didn't lose his leg, but he had a severe fracture, and many attempts to actually fix that fracture wouldn't work. So he had, difficulties walking. So which also meant, as a little youngster at home, I was doing all the running around for him, right? Like, get this, do that, and all of that. Initially not understanding what was going on, but then over time I knew, like, I used to help him put a bandage on an oozing leg, for instance, and he had difficulties like bending his knee and cutting his nails on the feet. So I used to cut it for him. And he had very specific kind of requirements. He used to say, oh, I can feel a little sharp edge here, can you please like cut this, can you please cut that? And every time I used to like cut it for him, the next time I would make sure that it's done to a level of perfection, that he doesn't, tell me that it's sharp or it's pointed. Because the challenge that he had was, at night, it could kind of, get tangled with the bed sheet or something. So it would pain. So I understood that was the reason why he would want me to kind of neatly, even out the edges of his nails. So there was that. And I still recall he was working until he was 82, 83. He passed away when he was 83, I think. And he used to get a office vehicle to go to work, and 20 years after retirement age, he was still working, just to kind of keep him engaged, not because there was a push for him to earn, just because he wanted to keep himself engaged, curious. And he used to read the newspaper, the whole newspaper, Deccan Chronicle, it was, top to bottom, every day, right? He had the time to do that. And he used to actually quiz me on things. He used to tell me, did you read this? Did you read that? So I think, and then a lot of etiquette, manners, discipline, and probably, give credit to my grandfather for that. And I till date, I kind of appreciate all of that, right? There are lots of good values that he has instilled. And I think, that's probably where some responsibility came from. And two, helping my, after my grandfather passed away, helping my grandmother as well with, chores in the house, helping my dad with chores in the house. And my dad as well was quite kind of, what is the right word to use? Was dynamic, and I'm saying was because he passed away about 10 years ago. Uh, Dynamic and quite kind of professional, both in the way he presents himself, and something that I have taken on. So even today, when I step out, if I'm wearing a dress shirt, it has to be like ironed with a little crease on the side. The shoes have to be clean and neatly polished. So that way, I've kind of gained a lot of such qualities from him as well. And also because he used to read a lot of books, and used to encourage me to read a lot of books as well, and used to share a lot of wisdom. And every and not everyone knows about this, but every day after I'm back from school, he used to tell me, "Oh, I've read this book. There are a couple of these things that I've marked for you to read." Uh, right, and I used to read some of those things as well. And then, last but not the least, right, my grandmother, who's been like my father's mother, who's been there all the time. She has been like a real inspiration, because you know she used to do all the running around, and there's a principle at home that if you're leaving for school, even if it is 7:30 a.m. in the morning, you have to like finish your uh, lunch. When I say lunch, you should have like a typical Indian meal, a full Indian meal before you leave. And she used to take all the effort to actually wake up at 5 in the morning, cook a fresh meal for me every day. And at 7 o'clock, everything used to be on the table for me to actually, have a meal and rush off to school. So all of those experiences, and my dad's eldest sister, right, she was my like go-to for everything from education to day-to-day activities. So I grew up with a lot of these inspiring individuals. And from there, I think I learned a lot about responsibility as well. And I'm the only kid, no siblings. I see a lot of my cousins have all got siblings, but I'm the only one in the family who does not have a sibling, both on the parental side and paternal side and the maternal side. Which kind of, and also growing up with grandparents, older grandparents, where you feel you have to like support them. Uh, so I think that's where probably a lot of you know responsibility came on early on in my life. And even today I feel, okay, it was unfortunate that some of the things that happened, but it was good that some of the things that I gained are helping me even today.
Most
Long,
definitely.
long answer.
Oh no, that's
It's
completely fine.
okay
I
to give the
appreciate the
context.
long answers.
Okay.
Oh no, I appreciate the long answers. I'm all for long answers, tangential answers. I'm open to anything you're willing to share. So no, thank you so much for sharing that. Because um, when you were saying those things, I was kind of thinking of some of my like experience in some sense. Because I grew up with my grandmother from the age of, I want to say, 12 to about 18 before I moved
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
Because my parents at that point were still living in the Middle East, and I moved to India to go to school, and so on. So I was kind of relating to some of the things that you were talking about. Um, feel free to not want to answer this question. I was going to ask, how does like knowing that or experiencing loss at such a young age, how did that affect you?
Mhm. I'm having to think now. Uh, did I? I mean, one. There were not many instances where I experienced that something was missing, right? Unless and until it kind of became explicit at some point, right? One, because uh, I was probably the most pampered, not just in the 4 or 5 of us in the household, within the household, but across the both paternal side of the family and maternal side of the family. So a lot of cousins, lots of aunts, lots of uncles, so very supportive that way. But again, like I'd probably not go into the depth and details of some of these things, but I think, yeah, there have also been a number of instances where um, where I've felt like even basic things like a parent teacher meeting at a school, right, for instance, um, or there's some examples that I can think of, like for instance, you know, I think not having a sibling, not because uh, I like the fact that I'm all by myself and all of that, but then instances where sometimes uh, I see my cousins connecting, you know, because of the surroundings I used to kind of feel, and then uh, yeah, a number of such instances, right? But I would probably say that uh, those instances were probably a lot less compared to me not feeling it, and that was because thanks to my family who didn't make me feel that something was missing. But it was good that I was also kind of being responsible, a lot more responsible at that age. That meant, I knew what was going on, why something was going on, and then eventually I could kind of support some of my cousins and other extended family with some of the things as well. So yeah, I'd probably, yeah, stick to some of those aspects.
Understood. The other, and I mean, I guess the fact that you were able to sort of experience it that way, I think, is quite beautiful. In the sense that that's very good to hear. The other thing that sort of popped up in my head was you were explaining some of those things earlier. You mentioned something about how it would be better if, well, not, and correct me if I'm not paraphrasing properly, but essentially the sentiment I took away from what you said was we would prefer for these things to not happen, but the fact that they've happened now and how they've shaped you are like you're sort of content with what that's made you to be. I feel like that's an understanding that we develop over time because in those moments, of course, nobody wants to go through those very hard times because those are very uncomfortable moments to go through.
Absolutely.
But I guess after those things happen, you develop a sense of perspective to understand that even though those things have happened, they've made me who I am. But I feel like we live also in a world today where we sometimes forget about the fact that we have to go through these tough experiences. And I mean that in a sense of the fact that, and granted, I will say this also as I'm asking you this question, I do consume a lot of internet content. So maybe some of this is just internet brain speaking out. But, every small thing that happens is sort of traumatic to some people. and again, I do not want to sound like I'm dismissing anybody's experience because I don't know what's happening in their lives. However, you do hear sort of like an uptick in a lot of mental health related issues and so on. And you also hear certain perspectives of like psychologists and so on the internet talking about how a lot of this is sort of an effect of perspective or lack of perspective and so on. Sorry, that's a bit of a long-winded question, but my point and the point that I'm trying to get to is developing that understanding to realize that we need to go through those uncomfortable moments. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I may blabber a little bit because I'm thinking while you're asking, right? So I think
It's completely fine.
One that is life, right? There'll be ups, there'll be downs, there'll be waves, there'll be everything. Like life takes you, in a number of different ways and turns. So you can't expect that everything will be nice, rosy, green. There'll also be thorns, there'll be cyclones, there'll be storms. Just like you know how businesses work these days as well, right? Or it's not just a smooth sail all the time. There could be storms, there could be fallouts, there could be whatnot, right? So I think one, it's important to understand that, right? That you know it's part of life. You can't escape it. And two, I think just coming to terms, I agree with some of these things is difficult, but I think once you realize that, yeah, this is something that has to happen, then you know you kind of deal with it. And it's not that I'm not saying like I put everything in my heart and kind of shut it down, and don't tell anyone about it. That's not the case, right? I'm a happy person. I'm not like stuffing anything internally. I think your my I think when I think about it personally, how I kind of deal with some of these things is I do things that I really enjoy, that I really like sometimes. Like, for instance, just going on a quiet walk, reflective walk, and, you know, just running through everything that has happened in the day to kind of figure out what is it that bothered me today. I feel is really good exercise. So sometimes on my birthdays or on New Year's, I kind of, do that as an exercise, and reflect on, okay, if there is a part of my life that's kind of a bother at the minute, what could it be? And why is it? So the more that I do that, I kind of land, okay, this bit that happened today is what is bothering me, and I don't want it to be a bother. So I then start to kind of, dig deep into, okay, why did it bother me? Was it something that I did, or was it something the other person did? To give you uh, a simple example, right? Like a couple of years ago, I went to I won't get into the details. I went to a GP, general practitioner, or a doctor here in the UK, and they said something in a nice way, and I giggled for a little bit because what they said was right, but at the same time, it was a bit funny for me, right? And this was a few years ago, and I came back home, and I didn't realize anything that day. But at the end of that week, when I was reflecting on that entire week on my own, I knew something was bothering me about that interaction. So I kind of, in my head, ran the entire interaction and started to think, what is it that bothered me about this interaction? Did they say something wrong about my health? No. Did they give me something which I forgot to take? No. Did I forget paying them? No. And then, what came to my mind was they said this and I actually giggled, which I thought was quite disrespectful of me to do that. It was not the case. I think it was still fine, but somewhere in my head, I kind of took it as not being nice on my part. And you won't believe, the next week, I found an excuse to go back to that GP, to go back, not to that specific GP, but to go back to that hospital. This may sound ridiculous, but it actually happened, right? Uh, go back to that hospital, somehow get a chance to sneak into that GP's room. And I said, I don't think you recall, but last week I was here and, we were talking about this and you asked me something, you said this, and then I giggled for a little bit. I just wanted to apologize. I didn't mean it in a negative way. It was just that was my sudden interaction. So I didn't mean any disrespect to you. And he just didn't recall, right? He just couldn't like recall what had happened, the conversation. He was like, the fact you're telling me now is making me think, but that's very brave of you to actually come all the way and say this to me, right? And then I felt like something had gotten off my chest. I felt really good. So that's a simple example, right? But I do that with day to day with life, and reflect extensively. You ask my wife as well. We both do reflection sessions end of every week. And the first question that I ask is, did I do something this week that made you very angry? uh, Start with the difficult one and get it out, right? So I think I've, for some reason, I've practiced that, which has been very, very helpful. And to your point, for everyone who's going through mental issues, well-being issues, health issues, personal issues, emotional issues, that works for me, right? Like, unless you keep something in your heart, that's when it'll kind of create a bother. But just let's just bring it out. And that doesn't mean that you have to please everyone in this world, right? Like, if you feel okay, there's a window that's closed, that's fine, and not to worry. That's for a right reason. You've chosen to do that. But it's important that you go through within yourself that there is a reason why that door has closed or window has closed, right? If you don't have a logical conclusion in your head or in your heart about a certain thing, then then that's a prick, right? But if you've had a logical kind of closure to something, then it isn't. And same thing with difficult situations as well, right? We can't kind of go back in life and change some of the things in the past. So you take good things from there. Don't forget anything that's important, that's affectionable, that's loving, but at the same time, don't dwell. Like, take the good things and do good, right? Multiply that good and keep going. I think that's probably like helped me quite a bit, I would say. And to your point, yeah, absolutely. I think we all consume a lot of internet content, uh, and I see a lot of these as well. But I think you know, besides doing meditation and yoga, I'm sure all of those are great practices. But I think just speaking to yourself and trying to identify, I do that almost every day. Like there are 20 things in my life. Is this bothering me? Is there something in this part that's bothering me? There something about my health that's bothering me? Is there something about my finances that's bothering me? So I go through everything. Then you can kind of pinpoint on one thing that is, pinching you, and then you kind of deal with it, and then it's all fine. So that's probably what I do as an exercise to help me deal with some of these things.
I'm curious now, since that you've mentioned that and you sort of broke it down very nicely. And thank you for doing that. Because as you were saying that, I was sort of thinking about some of those moments where, how could I potentially have been more reflective of certain things and so on? Because you do make a lot of sense, and I do agree in a lot of ways with needing to reflect and think about how you could have gone wrong in the way that you reacted in that instance that you shared and so on, like, and that seeking that closure that way. Um, but I have to ask, I'm very curious now. How did you learn to be this reflective? Was that something that you felt came to you naturally, or was that just a product of upbringing?
Uh, trying to think. I think it was probably like quite natural, or maybe there would have been like some sort of a realization at some point. Um, and because I still recall, right? Like it's funny. I keep referring to this instance from almost 21, 22 years ago when I was studying for my uh, 10th standard board exams. As usual, I was just one day before. I don't like studying one day before the exam. I would have probably like done my prep, way before. And so I ended up coming out as a typical Indian kid uh, out of the house and started playing badminton with my cousin, right? And there was this nosy neighbor who came out to their balcony, and she said, what you're studying for a 10th board exam is insufficient. It won't get you anywhere. She obviously said it in a vernacular language, but I'm sharing it in English. But I didn't. I ignored what she said at that point. But the next time I saw her the next day, I didn't feel like talking to her, right? And then I I came back home and I thought to myself, why did I not speak to her, right? Like, what was it about that meeting today that kind of made me not speak to her? Because I'm usually a nice child in the neighborhood who's like helping everybody, lively, saying hello and all of that. But it was not the case that day with this specific lady. And then that night I kind of just couldn't sleep. I had my exam the following day, and I was like thinking, what happened. And then I recalled that the previous day, this is what had happened, right? And for me, what what bothered me the most was, none from my own place, right? My dad or my grandmother, no one even like bothers to come and tells me any of that. And someone who doesn't know me actually comes and gives me free advice, unnecessary advice, right? So one, I could kind of consider it as naivety, ignorant, doesn't know about what I do, how I study, so I shouldn't just take it to heart. I should just ignore it. Or on the other hand, you know, don't say anything like that unless you have learned about what I've done, right? Right. You take the responsibility to, or ask the question in a different way, right? Have you finished studying for your exam tomorrow? Rather than making a bold statement that what you're studying is not sufficient enough for you to make something out of your life, right? So so I kind of debated this quite a bit, and I said, I thought, I kind of pinched myself. I said maybe I probably got it wrong, right? But then as the more times I played that question back in my head, I was like, she could have asked the right question. She didn't ask the right question, right? or she didn't frame it rightly. And you won't believe, till date, I've not spoken to her just for that one reason. Uh, and she probably, I don't even know if she herself knows the reason why I don't talk to her. It's been 21, 22 years. But every time I see that lady's face, I'm reminded of uh, that statement that she made, right? And every time I think I should probably like take the opportunity to tell her why I've not spoken to her for 21, 22 years now, but I don't think there has never been an opportunity. So reflecting on that, I don't feel, there is something about it in my heart that's still kind of open about it, because I feel I've closed it for a reason which according to me is right. I don't have to worry about it. That's it. Uh, but from her side, I feel okay. Maybe she must be thinking, why is this guy not talking to me? Why have not been invited to his wedding or whatnot, right? And I'm like, I know there is a reason. If you don't know, then you come and ask me, right? I'm not coming and telling you because I have sorted it out at my end. So I think the reason I'm quoting that example is to your question around, you know that some of the doors are closed. You've reflected enough to say that this is not worth kind of dwelling on anymore, right? And there is a logical conclusion to it because I feel strongly about this, right? And so I think there were experiences like that which kind of early on, which kind of made me realize some of these aspects. So I don't think it's probably, it was probably a natural thing that came to me maybe early on. I don't think it was part of my upbringing. Were we all very reflective in the family? Probably not. uh, um, but I think it was just some of these experiences kind of which made me feel okay, like why is this person saying this? Like what is the hidden reason? And I'm also a natural overthinker, which is not good. So I kind of go to like extremes of things, and kind of you know figure out everything. Like even if today, if you have to plan for travel, uh, you know i I think of like 20 scenarios that probably would there's only 1% of chances of occurrence of it, and I'm prepared for all of those, right? So extreme overthinker, not good, but it helps in a number of scenarios. So yeah, and yeah. To answer your question very briefly, I think it's probably been part of me early on. I don't think I kind of actively learned it, and I think in the professional scenario, I started probably applying it more consciously in the last 10 years. I thought, oh, it could be helpful in the professional world as well. Why people say certain things, why people do certain things, why people address emails in a certain way, right? And even today, I keep telling this to a lot of my team, right? If there is an email that comes to me which just says hi or hello versus hi Raghu or hello Raghu, I feel a lot more connected with the email that addresses me by my name rather than the email that comes in with just a hi or a hello, right? I don't know for what reason. I still kind of respond to both the emails in the same way I would, but just that the email that comes with an address, I feel a lot more kind of involved, engaged, and connected. So it's little things like that. I started about 10 years ago using those at work in my professional world as well, and it's definitely helping.
For sure. And a part of me does feel like, I guess that reflection comes from being a bit of an overthinker. The reason I say that is because I am also an extreme overthinker. So I feel like it's sort of a good byproduct of overthinking. But overthinking in and of itself is not the best. I agree with you wholeheartedly over there. But I'm curious to know, how do you deal with overthinking in situations where you feel like it doesn't need to be overthought?
I think the fact that I'm going to overthink now, knowing the fact that I'm going to overthink now itself is good. uh, So when my mind kind of goes, starts going 10 steps further, then you can almost like, I almost get a trigger, a bell ring saying, okay, like you're overthinking, and which is, so at those instances I don't stop overthinking, I still kind of run with it, but I'm conscious that all the thoughts that have just come in my head are a result of overthinking. It won't be the case otherwise. So I think I don't deal with it, I still overthink. I think I'm just aware that I'm overthinking, which is important in my view.
Yeah, you make a very interesting point about awareness, because if I were to observe myself, say, over the past 7 years or something since I've been here, yeah, I've been an overthinker 7 years back, and I'm still an overthinker to this day, but I definitely would say I'm much more aware of my overthinking now than I was 7 years back. Um, and whenever I feel like I am losing sight of the things that I think about, I try to stop myself. Um, it depends on the cases and scenarios that I'm thinking about, of course. Um, but what would you say has helped you develop that awareness?
What has helped me develop that awareness? I think probably experience, right? Like, because when I know that I'm overthinking, I don't stop overthinking, because that I know that'll be a bother for me again. I'll overthink as to why I stopped overthinking, right? So I don't stop myself. I still overthink, but I'm just aware that, I've done this. And I think it also depends on the impact that it can have on others, right? Right. So sometimes I kind of start to think, okay, what will be the impact of this on somebody else? And then now that I'm aware of this impact, now that I'm aware that I'm overthinking, you know, should I should I be more aware as to how I respond to a certain situation, or how I respond to a certain email, or how I respond to a certain problem, or how how my tone is on a certain call, for instance. Um, yeah, because, and I think, especially in a more professional environment post COVID, I think overthinking has probably grown all the more. Which is one of the cons of working from home, working remotely, working online, right? You just can't interact with a person after a meeting. Just can't go for lunch with someone to understand what their sentiment was about what we said in a certain meeting, right? So outside the meeting, out on this side of the camera, I start to think, okay, like, how did this call go? Like, what did this person think? Like, did this idea land well, or all of that? And I think, sometimes you feel, okay, like, I'm just not going to focus on this. I'm just going to, like, shut down. But then before shutting down, all I think is that going to impact somebody else negatively? If yes, then I probably continue to overthink and kind of take steps to actually address that. Maybe call them and say, you know in case you were overthinking, this is what I meant, right? So hope that's conveyed crystal clear. But if it's overthinking on my end, if it's about how I have taken something on, even then I call them and say, I know you mentioned this, you know does it mean this, or does it mean this, or does it mean this, or is it just me overthinking that you could have meant this? So I think sometimes clarifying that has helped. And that's when I kind of got to become more aware that, okay, when I speak to someone, I know they've meant just this. It's just my head that's kind of, you know, gone gone exponentially to kind of think about some of these, circumstances in a more extreme case. But at the same time, I think, in some cases, overthinking helps as well, right? And I overthink, especially in cases where I feel someone would feel bad about something, right? And in most cases, be it close teams, close family, where I feel, okay, if we do something, then there is a potential that in this instance, you know, something could happen, like, or someone could feel bad as a result of something happening like this. I won't quote any personal examples, but and that I know that because of experiences, right, that I have had, that my dad has had, or my family members have had. So I'm conscious that, okay, now there is a similar thing that's going to happen, so let me overthink. Let me kind of plan out all these different scenarios and try and preempt some of those instances by doing something proactively right now, rather than getting to that situation potentially and scrambling for ideas to stop that from happening at that time. So overthinking helps in a number of instances. I wouldn't say it's not helpful, but it's not always helpful.
Yeah, I can relate to that in the sense that I feel it's essentially not helpful in those negative scenarios where we might tend to get into like a rabbit hole about stuff that doesn't need that, for the lack of a better way of phrasing it. Um, yeah, because I've gone to a ton of rabbit holes that, looking back now with the gift of hindsight, I feel like, yeah, it was probably very unnecessary to do so. Because sometimes, I guess, from a perspective of taking action, it can often increase this amount of time that you take from like thinking about it to acting on it, which I guess the example that I could use is, we kind of talked about this off air about me taking a break because things got a little hectic and not continuing to do the podcast. I think that was filled with a bit of overthinking. That period of my life was filled with a bit of overthinking that would have probably calmed down if I would have just started, like, come back and like started doing this again. Because as soon as I started doing this again, I feel like that side of things, in terms of how I was overthinking of a lot of this different scenarios, sort of calmed down. So I definitely feel like that also like has a role to play in terms of thinking versus action, and how much of it is potentially hindering ourselves from acting on the things that we need to act on. Any thoughts on that?
Um, Again, like, just being aware helps, right? And I think just making people around you aware also helps, right? Like, to give you some fun examples, right? My wife knows when I'm overthinking, when she knows that I've gone into a silent mode. I am very sincerely kind of wrapping rubbish, and taking it to the bin store downstairs, dropping them off, sorting them in the recycle bin. That's a typical activity of mine, and my wife would immediately guess that, okay, this is like an overthinking zone, and now he's going to, like, he's now aware that he's overthinking, so he's just going to, like, clear it up from his head, right? Or if I'm like, trying to kind of clean the house, sort things out, put things in an orderly manner, or do a lot of ironing, or sort out laundry, or do any sort of you know cleaning or cleansing or organizing activity, then Shruti knows that I'm trying to not overthink a bit too much, or I'm reflecting on something, or I've become aware that I'm overthinking. And so I think it's, and then I come back and I tell her that, what, this is going on in my head, and this is what I've been thinking about, right? And she'll be like, yeah, I knew this was going on. And have you all sorted with stuff? And she'll be, of course, thankful that the house is cleaner and better and shining. But But yeah, I think it's me being aware is very important. And I think, people immediately around us being aware, I think is also important, both for our own well-being and for their own well-being as well. And I think you just can't, right? It's I've read so much about it. It's a trait. And I've read so many books to see, like, is there a way to kind of stop it? And I don't think there is a way. And even books that have suggestions on not how not to overthink, I think fail at a certain instance, because there's so many contextual things, which are very subjective, which are very personal, which only apply to a certain person's life, that cannot be recorded in a specific book, right? So I think, and also some of those instances of overthinking could be triggered by your own personal experiences, either from childhood or previous years, right? So it's not that, you know there's this new thing happening and you're overthinking about it, right? It's a new thing happening, but then you're actually connecting it back to an old thing that has happened in the past, and that's what is making you overthink, right? And for me, most of my overthinking scenarios are as a result of something that's been linked to the past, where something untoward has happened, or someone has not felt good about something, or I have not felt good about something, um, or someone has felt hurt, for instance, and that kind of triggers my overthinking. You know, uh, what do you call overthinking habit? It's But I think, one, being aware is important, very important. Being aware of being making the people around us aware is very important. And I think being aware of consequences, like how you react, how you respond, how that can impact others, is also important. But yeah, but having said that, I think, I I still overthink. I wouldn't say there is not gone a days where I don't overthink, but I'm aware that I overthink, and I just, you know stay calm about it and make sure that everyone around me, at least immediately around me, are aware as well.
From what you just said, it sort of connects to me that communication also is very important, because that way I think you get it off of your chest in terms of the things that you're thinking about, and you help ease any thoughts that the other person might have about certain things. And you brought up your marriage and how your wife understands some of your actions, and um, the moments in which you're overthinking and sorting things out and so on. So I feel like this is a very beautiful or last question to sort of ride this episode into its sunset, if you will. What are some beautiful lessons that you've learned from marriage,
Oh,
or lessons in general, good and bad?
um, it's a partnership, right? Like, I think, there is nothing about yours, mine. It's all about ours, and I think I can feel that. And naturally, I think um, because of my background and experience, I think it's natural that, you know a bit like that. And I think, um, you know lesson, I won't say lesson, but I think there's more appreciation for, like, each other's growth. I learn a lot. We both of us learn a lot from each other. um, there is obviously compromises and adjustments that we have to make, but at least one of us should make, right? And of the two of us, she's probably the a lot more, adjusting and open to change, because she's aware that I'm an overthinker, right? So I've already thought like 10 steps ahead. So and she knows that. So she knows that I'm like prepared for some of these things that may happen. And so if I say something, okay, like, I'm thinking maybe we'll do this, we'll do that, Shruti will go, okay, I get why you are saying this, because you might have like chalked out all those scenarios in your head, which is good for me. So let's just, go with that. Right. So I think, again, that communication is very important. And I think, as I mentioned, we have our reflection sessions, right? We go for a walk, or you know we sit down with a cup of tea, and how did this week go, like, what happened this week that bothered you, right? Or that bothered me. Did I say something that you didn't appreciate, or do you think I could have done something better? I think, I go first or she goes first, and we both answer the same questions. uh, and then we're like, okay, week done, sorted. Let's sort out what we're going to cook next week, what shopping we have to do, right? Get back to the logistics, basics of it. So I think communication is key. I think that's probably one big, I wouldn't say a lesson. I think, marriage kind of, because until then, you're only communicating um, um, with people around you, either family or friends. But I think marriage is a kind of lifelong relationship, right? Like, you're staying together, you're sharing everything. So I think, communication is key. So, and I think it's not about just talking, it's about talking your heart out, right? So communication could mean anything, right? I could send an email, send a message, or whatever. But I think when I say communication, it's like talking your heart out and head out. What's going on in your head? What's going on in your heart? And I think that's important. And that's probably, again, like, I wouldn't say, uh, I wouldn't say it's just being uncomfortable, right? Being uncomfortable is very important. And I think that's probably one big lesson that I'd probably share.
Awesome. That reason for me asking that is a little personal because, I've started to think about that, all that kind of stuff a little more recently. But anyway, thank you so much for sharing everything that you did, Raghu. I had a great time. And how was this for you?
Well, I was not sure what I was signing up when you had reached out. I enjoyed the conversation as well. I'd probably go and share this with Shruti shortly, and I'd probably like, then 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 tell her how I'm overthinking about this whole thing, and then she'll tell me, her opinion. But no, absolutely, I think it was good. One, the fact that you reached out, uh, was, I thought was really good, because it's good to connect. And I've probably started doing that all the more, especially post COVID. I did mention to you I had a very bitter experience with COVID, and I've started doing that all the more right now. But these days, like, it's difficult for whatever reason to keep in touch. You know, you think that, okay, I'm going to call this person today, but then you'll realize it's already been 3 weeks or 1 month since this thought came to your head, and you still haven't reached out to this person, right? That's just because, yeah, time flies, right? And we're all very busy. That's no excuse, but that's probably become a reality these days.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, in such a climate, I think you reaching out was very, very thoughtful. And I didn't know what I was signing up to, but having been part of this conversation, you've reminded me of a number of things that were good memories, and probably now think about some of those things and share more things with others as well. So thank you for helping me revive some of my old memories as well, including meeting you on the flight from Munich to Mumbai. Really good and nice to see you after a really long time as well, Prateek.
Same here, same here. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this, firstly, and for sharing your experiences. I really appreciate that. So, yeah, and for those of you watching and listening, thank you so much. I hope there was something that you got to take away from this. I personally think there is. Feel free to share those thoughts. But thank you so much once again, and we'll see you guys next time.